Hey guys and gals, Vlad here with AVT-Astro, and today we are going on a little road trip. Alrighty guys, so anyhow, I am making a pretty long trip to go pick up an Astrophysics 155. The drive is about 7 hours long. For those of you guys that are very safety oriented, I am not holding the phone. Okay, both my hands are on the wheel, and I am driving. But anyway, I kind of had an idea to make a video about Astro Myths, and like kind of more oriented to the equipment side of it, though. Some of the myths and some facts about just astronomy equipment in general. So since I have all this time, I'm kind of going to do that during this trip, and hopefully you guys enjoy it. Alright, first Astro Myth that I kind of wanted to debut and kind of get out of the way is that you need X type of telescope for an X type of like observing or imaging or whatever. So what do I mean by that? Well, there's plenty of times that I heard that like you need at least an 8-inch telescope to do, let's say, like deep sky observing, right? Now, yes, it is true that an 8-inch telescope will show you more than like a 3-inch refractor, right? Whether it be an achromat or an apromat, it doesn't really matter. On deep sky stuff. The thing is that it will show you more at higher powers, right, on smaller objects. Conversely, though, especially if you have a pretty fast refractor, it will actually show you more on the wide field type of stuff. So it's not necessarily true like across the board, right, that like one type of telescope will show you a better view of everything just kind of across the board. They're just different tools for different jobs, and that's why there's really not one perfect telescope that will do everything. That's how you end up like me, having like over 100 scopes, right? Well, not having, I should say having had over 100 scopes. All right, another one is cool down of telescopes. Refractors cool down way faster than like let's say SCTs or DOBs. It is true, assuming that the refractor is, let's say, under 5 inches. The larger ones, actually, believe it or not, can take just as long as an SCT to cool down. Like, I've got a 7-inch Meade, and it's only a doublet, too. But yeah, I mean, that thing cools down, just as long as, like, let's say, like an 8 or a 10-inch SCT. So if it's small, that is true. If it's, if they're larger, then it's not really true. Alright, here's another one that I read on the forums all the time, okay? And this one does kind of bother me. So somebody will ask, hey, what's the best telescope for, whatever? And the guy replies, right, he's like, oh yeah, I own this telescope, it's the best, right? And from their signature, sometimes they'll even say that's like literally the first, like, let's say nicer scope that they've bought. Alright guys, I don't care what it's about, okay, whether it's telescopes, cars, or whatever. Like, let's take cars for an example. If all you've ever owned is a Ford Mustang and you claim that it's the best sports car ever, okay, how credible is that if that's the only sports car you've ever owned? I don't think it's very credible, right? Because you have no basis for comparing it to anything else. So same thing with telescopes. So if you're, if somebody has owned several scopes that you're kind of interested in, then yes, their opinion kind of matters. If the only telescope that they recommend is the only one that they've owned, chances are they don't really know what they're talking about. Alright, another one that I read on forums all the time. I get comments on my videos all the time. I can never afford that telescope. Alright, if you live in, you know, like the United States or any of the other, you know, first world countries, I guess, you know, is a good way to say you can. It's mostly, you know, this isn't a financial advice channel or anything like that, but I don't make that much money, and if I could afford it, you could afford it too. It's primarily about life choices. I've, you know, said it before in other YouTube videos. I see plenty of people every single day, they'll line up to Starbucks and spend $6, you know, a day on their Starbucks. You know, if you just cut out your Starbucks habit, or, you know, whatever type of, you know, like thing that you spend, you know, discretionary income on. I realize that everybody has to pay for their rent or, you know, like necessary bills, but we also all have discretionary income that we spend on stuff. Even though you might think that it's necessary, for you to have a coffee every single morning for $6. It's not. So if you truly, you know, desire a telescope, you know, what let's say it's even $5 grand, you can afford it. It might take you a few years. It might take some, you know, cutting out of some stuff. Okay, so this is kind of just some financial tough love, I guess. All right, next one is moving on to eyepieces. More expensive, bigger eyepieces are better, right? So let's say we're talking about the Ethos, the Naglers, the Explore Scientifics, like 82s or 100 degrees or whatever, like the big wide field eyepiece. Well, I mean, they're better in a certain way. If you've watched any of my videos on eyepieces, I mean, they're better in the sense that they give you a wider, more immersive field of view. But they're also worse in some respects because the eyepiece is bigger, so it's heavier, right? So it might not work in smaller scopes as well. Balance becomes an issue, especially if you're switching from a smaller eyepiece to a larger eyepiece. You're gonna have to rebalance your scope and that type of deal. So bigger and more expensive is not always better. Now, in a similar train of thought, another thing that gets posted all the time is that smaller, simpler eyepieces are better, let's say, like for the planets. You know, we're talking about like orthos or, you know, like stuff like that. Or like colossal eyepieces that have fewer elements that are smaller and that type of deal. I think there's some truth to that, I think. I mean, just overall, I mean, you know, glass is a medium, right? So the light has to pass through it, no matter how perfect it is, it's gonna get distorted somewhere, right? So having fewer elements is better. However, though, a lot of times, depending on the telescope, they'll come with the huge trade-off of the eye relief being really short, to where you have to be really close to, you know, to the eye, to the lens, essentially. So the comfort factor drops as well. So you might not be able to observe for as long, as comfortably, and that type of deal. So while it could provide you a better image, you could be seen less because of the, you know, lack of the comfort of using the eyepiece, and that's typically in lower focal length. So let's say like 10 millimeters or below, and that's why sometimes, you know, if you get a long eye relief eyepiece, you know, technically it does have more elements because essentially they have a Barlow built in, is how they get the long eye relief. It could, you know, you could actually be seeing more with them. All right, this one, it's kind of a myth, kind of not a myth. Red light preserves your night vision. Well, that is true. However, the caveat, though, the thing that you gotta keep in mind is that dim red light preserves your night vision. If the red light is really bright, like I've been to plenty of star parties where people are running around with the red flashlight, right? That's way too bright. Okay, if it's bright red light, it will ruin your night vision. All right, this is a kind of not an equipment-based astro myth, but a very valid one. When the full moon is out, you can't do any observing, guys. All right, look, if the moon is out, if you're in the city, there's a lot of light pollution. there's still plenty to observe. I mean, first of all, you could observe the moon, right? If the planets are out, you could observe the planets, right? If, you know, none of those are out, or you've looked at those, you know, they're boring to you, cool. Check out double stars. Those are, you know, the very actually interesting objects to observe. There's doubles, triple stars, quadruple stars, you know, all kinds of cool stuff. So very, very cool. And the other nice thing is that you don't need a really big, you know, telescope with a lot of aperture for those as well. So now, moon is not a total, you know, deal killer. It's a deal killer for deep sky stuff. However, though, check out my videos on EAA, because you could do EAA very successfully, electronically assisted astronomy, even with the full moon out. Do it all the time. Okay, so an APROMAT, an APO is better than an ACHROMAT. So, you know, I'm at the risk of sounding like a snob, I'd say that that's true across the board. You know, I read about it all the time that a guy will post, they're like, oh yeah, you know, I've got a, you know, F5 120 millimeter acro, and you know, I pump up the power on the planets and it gives me great views. Well, I mean, great views compared to what? If that's the only scope that you own, you know, it's great that you enjoyed the views, right? But I mean, is it as good as an APROMAT? No, it's not. However, though, I will say that it's, you know, the myth is kind of valid, because you know, I could set up a top of the line APO, like let's say like my Astrophysics 130 GT, right next to that 120 millimeter Orion, you know, F5 short tube refractor is what they're called, an achromat, right? And if we're at low power, let's say if both the scopes are at like 20x, you know, the average guy is probably not going to see any difference in the view through those scopes. So for low power sweeping of the Milky Way, they are awesome values, you know, on the telescope. I mean, is the focuser going to be as good? Probably not. You know, is the fit and finish going to be probably as good? Probably not. But the views at low power are really good. But once you start to get above like 50x, that's when, unless you have like a really long acro, you know, an APO will perform way better, even on deep sky stuff, by the way. Alright, for the astrophotography type of crew, I'll give you guys one too. I'm not, you know, I'm not too much into that, but this is one that I hear all the time. You need like an, you know, so this is the myth, you need like at least an f6 or faster telescope. So basically the key is that you need like a really fast telescope to do astrophotography. Now, it is true that it is easier to do astrophotography with the fast telescope, because the faster, and then we're talking about f-stop wise, it's just like in the camera lens, you know, like a lot of people don't really think about it like that. It's just like with the DSLR lens. Okay, the faster the lens, right, the quicker the exposure can be. So like the more, you know, like basically data essentially you're gathering, the more light you're gathering, right? And actually the easier it is to track, you know, because typically you get also a wider field of view, right, with the faster setup. Now, just like in the camera lens, though, what people don't really think about a lot of times is the faster that the optic is, the more, you know, basically optical distortions there will be. Whether it's coma, the image just overall won't be as sharp, even in the center of the field of view. Okay, so that can definitely be an issue. The other thing that, you know, people kind of, and when you're starting out, you don't really care, but like the other thing that people kind of don't think about is, let's say if you start out with like a 60 millimeter refractor, right, that's really fast. They make them like, you know, F5s these days, that's an APO or whatever. There's only, I mean, you know, probably like, I don't know, like 40, 50 objects that you could really photograph very well at, you know, a decent image scale. Anything that's a smaller object, including most of the Messier objects, besides like M31 and, you know, a few of the like, you know, M33, a few of the really large galaxies and really large nebulas, right? You're out of objects to photograph, okay? So you will have to go to those longer focal lengths, which either means that, just like with the camera lens, either you're going to have a really large aperture, right, to to kind of keep your fast focal ratios, or you're gonna have to have a longer focal ratio in a, like if you were sticking with a smaller like aperture, basically. All right, Astro Myth. It's more important to have a darker sky than a larger telescope. For deep sky stuff, it's not a myth at all, honestly. It's a fact. Pretty much, so I've got a 24-inch stop, right? I would way rather use a 12-inch, let's say, because I also have a 12-inch SCT. I'd way rather use a 12-inch SCT from a dark sky site than a 24-inch stop from, a light-polluted city. I'd just see more. Plain and simple as that. Same thing with wider field telescopes. You do see more from a darker sky, with like a small refractor, if you're trying to go for those really large objects. Obviously, if you're looking at something like the moon or the planets, that does not apply. So we're talking about deep sky stuff. All right, so I probably shouldn't be talking about this one because I'm very guilty of owning these telescopes, but you need a Takahashi to do planetary observing, and not necessarily just Takahashi, but whatever premium brand kind of floats your boat. Planetary observing, astrophotography, or whatever. Guys, again, I'm very, I will say I'm very fortunate that I have, and I feel privileged that I have had the chance to observe or do astrophotography with the best of the best equipment in the world, for amateur astronomy, right? But I'll also be honest with you guys to where, and assuming that the telescope's not completely, rubbish, okay? I'm just as happy with observing with a more entry-level telescope, because it's kind of like, it's one of those things to where, when you know what the best is, right, you also realize that the kind of more common equipment, let's say an Orion telescope or something like that, it's really not all that much worse. The fit and finish is going to be a little bit better on the more premium scopes. Yeah, the contrast is going to be a little bit better, but you're getting almost everything with those kind of more common type of scopes. So no, don't buy into all the internet hype. If I ever come across as hyping up the premium brands too much, I try to keep it down to earth for people, because I'm not trying to sell this stuff. It's not like Takahashi's paying me money to talk about their telescopes or astrophysics. They don't even know they exist, more than likely. But same thing on the forums. Some of the guys, they'll have the premium scope, and they say it's the best thing since sliced bread. Are they awesome scopes? They are. I'm not gonna lie, I do enjoy using them. I own quite a few. But if that's just not a priority for you to own one of those, right, don't think that you're missing out on a terribly much. Just enjoy the hobby. It's a hobby after all, right? So just go get out there and enjoy the gear that you have. Because assuming you're not using just total rubbish, you're already seeing most of what there is to be seen. All right, so this is for my SCT folks. I've seen this kind of practiced in the field, and kind of talked about on the forums. If you have the f6.3 reducer, let's say if you're doing visual use or even astrophotography, really, you should always have it on the back of your telescope. Actually, this was years ago, but I actually made this mistake to where I thought, I had these wide field eyepieces, right, and I was gonna slap the f6.3 reducer and magically make the the SCT, I forget which one it was probably a C8 or something, magically wider. Okay, guys. So the rear opening on an SCT is pretty small. It's actually smaller than 2 inches, I believe. So by you slapping that focal reducer, it doesn't really give you anything. Okay, there's a maximum field of view that you can get through your SCT. Now, if you're using, let's say, like, you know, shorter focal length type, let's say if you got like a 9mm Nagler, right? And you know, you don't want to buy, like, let's say like a 20mm Nagler or like a 26 or whatever. The f6.3 reducer will be handy because that essentially gives you like another wider field eyepiece. But however, though, if you take your 20mm Nagler and slap it into 2-inch diagonal, right, you're not magically getting like a 31mm Nagler. What's going to happen is that you're going to have vignetting. So basically, like, you know, you won't see the whole field of view that the eyepiece can produce. It'll just kind of, you know, like slowly start to get dark out, basically black out. So there's a maximum, you know, essentially field of view that you could get through an SCT. And the f6.3 reducer, or whatever reducer you're using, does not magically fix that. All right, so another one is a narrow band filter should not be used on telescopes that are 5 inches or smaller for visual use. Well, if you're talking about high power observing, that could be true, although there's plenty of planetary nebula that are bright enough to use a narrow band filter on, even with the smaller telescope. But if you have a wide field refractor, whether it's an Apple or an Acromap, if you have one of those really wide field of view eyepieces, slap on your like O3 filter on it, right, and pointing out some nebulas. It's an amazing earth-shattering experience. It's one of the reasons that I actually own smaller refractors, is because you could get those really wide field of views, and the telescope throws up a plenty bright enough image at those low powers. Alright guys, so I figured I'd do a different shot while I'm stopped here for this one. This is a favorite of mine. Alright, so just because you're a YouTuber, you make money, right? Like, you're just rolling in the dough, raking it in. Alright, obviously guys, yes, there are people on YouTube that make money. Okay, your average guy that's making astronomy videos though on YouTube makes more or less the equivalent of $0. Yes, I do get some equipment that I get to keep for reviews. It's really, this isn't like Takahashi's that we're talking about. It'd be like an eyepiece or like an entry-level scope or something like that. What the average YouTuber, and we're talking about people that have let's say less than 100,000 subscribers, makes on YouTube is enough to pay for a coffee addiction, a month. I mean, realistically, it's just not very much. So anyhow, yeah, most of the folks on YouTube, whether it be in astronomy or, other topics, I mean, we're just making these videos just because we really enjoy the topic. And we enjoy kind of sharing our knowledge, essentially. All right, this next one kind of pertains to any type of used astronomy gear. It really kind of applies to anything used, but we'll talk about astronomy gear. Okay, so X person is selling this because apparently there's a problem with it or whatever, because why else would they be selling it? Guys, part of the, if I sold, or if I kept all the equipment that I've had, that didn't have an issue with it, okay, I mean, I'd literally, I'd need a warehouse by now. Okay, I mean, part of the fun of astronomy or any hobby, is, trying out new gear. And, there's nothing, I've bought literally thousands of items used, okay. Very, very seldomly, especially in astronomy, have I ran into people trying to push off their problem on a fellow amateur astronomer, okay? So, if you're buying from somebody used, right, let's say it's on Astronomy or Cloudy Nights, if they have good feedback, I could almost assure you there's not going to be an issue with the item. It's going to be as described, okay? Most astronomy people are very straightforward, very nice people. Alright, so this is another one that's kind of a relic of the past. The best telescope to start out with is like an 8-inch Dob. Don't have anything against 8-inch Dobs, although I will say out of the hundreds of scopes that I've owned, I've actually never even owned an 8-inch Dob. Not trying to say anything bad about them, but so that wisdom, right? It's still very valid if you want a large aperture for very little money. Okay, so that's still valid. So that's kind of what you're shooting for, large aperture, or I should say larger, for very little money. By all means, go get your 8-inch Dob. Now, the only issue is that, you know, when this wisdom kind of came about, you know, there was much less light pollution around. Now, most people, and also more people used to live like out in the country, you know, back when this kind of wisdom was like the leading thing. These days, guys, I mean, the light pollution is so bad for most folks in the city that, you know, the issue with an 8-inch Dob is that, especially when you're, you know, getting into the hobby and you're just starting out, is that you just really won't be able to find anything in the thing, you know, if you're, you know, observing from the city. I mean, if you're kind of committed to going to star parties, have the opportunity to go to star parties, not really an issue. You can still do your star hopping, that type of deal. These days, that's why I recommend a go-to telescope, because you know, you'll actually be able to find stuff and look at it. And you know, most go-to scopes you can still use manual as well. So if you want to learn how to do star hopping, which I highly recommend, you know, you can do that when you go out to dark skies. If you get your 8-inch Dob and you set it up in the city, and you know you're new to astronomy, unfortunately you're probably going to be disappointed, because you just won't really be able to find very much. I mean, besides some bright stars and, you know, like the moon and planets and that type of deal. Alrighty, guys and gals, so hopefully you guys found this topic to be interesting. It certainly helped me pass the time a little bit quicker, you know, kind of thinking of all the different things that I've heard over the years that I kind of wanted to talk about. So yeah, if you guys have any ones, you know, any like myths or facts or whatever that I have not addressed that you want me to kind of address, feel free to leave a thing in, you know, a comment in the thing below. If you're not subscribed, please do consider subscribing, because that way, you know, in like 900 years, I will become a very wealthy YouTuber. So, you know, see you guys in the next video. Bye.